in America's cities, tree canopy coverage is not equitably distributed. And that's actually not by accident, that's actually by design. So in the 1930s, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which was a federal agency created after, as part of the New Deal in the recovery from the Great Depression, this entity was created to distribute loans to families who had been struggling and were going to use homeownership as a ladder to create generational wealth for their families. And we know that folks who were systemically left out of receiving those loans were people of color, specifically Indigenous people, immigrants, and Black people. And we know that. And what ended up happening was communities that were rated as very desirable, highly desirable, and ended up receiving much more investment in all of their infrastructure than communities that were rated as hazardous or declining. And you can kind of guess which communities were rated hazardous and declining, and which kinds of populations were relegated to living in those areas, which tended to be lower income folks and people in the BIPOC community. And so this is a study, this slide shows a study of the percentage of 94% of cities that that participated in this kind of redevelopment work via the Homeowners Loan Corporation saw disparities in urban heat temperatures along the red line and non-red line neighborhood boundaries. And so this is a map of Baltimore, and this is a map of the areas that had been graded by that corporation, that federal agency. And it corresponds today with low tree canopy coverage in the hazardous communities and higher tree canopy coverage in the desired communities. And so what we know is, in order to kind of make sure that everybody gets the benefits that trees provide, we have to be realistic about what we're starting with right now and the inequities that exist right now. And so what we've done is created a tool called Tree Equity Score to help communities figure out where these inequities are, and then work on addressing them, right, systemically, so that regardless of area of city, any kind of work that folks are attempting to plant more trees, care for trees, make sure that folks can get the air quality and shade and water quality, and the list goes on. You all are all like environmental activists, so you know the benefits that nature provides. But in order for everybody to get those benefits, we need to make sure that we're prioritizing the areas that have been systemically left out of receiving those benefits, right? So using tools like Tree Equity Score is one method of doing that. One of the other ways that we can do that and extend the benefits that trees provide to everybody is actually through employment. So we actually have a massive shortage of qualified tree care professionals in our field. We're on track to grow by 11% in the next decade almost. And right now we don't have a whole lot of folks in the field who are at every stage of becoming a tree care professional. We don't have enough folks who are interested in doing this kind of work. One of the lesser known or lesser, I think, thought about benefits that trees provide are actual paychecks. I mean, urban trees require care long-term. And so the good news is there's not a ton of experience needed. If you do have education, you could go right into kind of supervisory roles, but we're paying pretty competitive wages for very little education needed to get into the field, which is really exciting. And so in urban forestry, we have tons of different kinds of jobs. These are some example positions that kind of exemplify a career pathway in the field. And so folks can come in entry level as a ground worker, can move up to a climber trainee within a period of a couple of months. And folks can move into foreman and crew leader and supervisory positions within a period of less than a year on the job, depending on their interests and, of course, the demand in that area. But we're seeing demand spike in huge ways across the country. And so if you or anybody that you know wants to get into tree care, let us know, because we have lots of partners who are looking to hire. And you know, what we're working on is actually centering people of color as the priority for coming into the field at every level, right? As business owners, as urban foresters, as foremen, climbers, whatever your interest, we have opportunities for you. And so we're so excited to be partnering with Tazo to create a brand new Tazo Tree Corps. And this is an initiative to hire 25 Black and Indigenous people of color across the country over the next 2 years, and support them if they've had no experience, or they do just have kind of a passing interest in the environment, to actually train them on becoming paid tree care professionals. And so we have a little video here from our friend Sizza, who has partnered with us to promote this initiative. So I'm gonna go ahead and play her video now.
We all know about climate change. They say if we don't take action soon, our planet will hit a point of no return. But for many Americans, the effects of climate change are already here, like right here. Across the country, Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities are already facing the worst of it. Some are 20 degrees hotter than whiter neighborhoods in the same city, and it's no mystery why. Decades of discriminatory zoning practices turned some communities into sacrifice zones. Neighborhoods where chemical treatment plants, highways, and heavy polluters were placed. The result, communities with less green space and fewer trees. And trees are a bigger deal than you think. Trees absorb pollution from the air, restore neighborhood water quality, and improve everyone's mental health. We all deserve these benefits. That's why I'm teaming up with Tazo Tea and American Forest to fight for climate justice. This year, we're launching the Tazo Tree Corps, a paid workforce that will build and maintain the urban canopy in 5 cities across the country. I know it sounds too simple, but if planting trees can improve everything from air quality to economic opportunity, then what are we waiting for? This spring, step up for climate justice and join the Tazo Tree Corps. There's a brighter future out there. We just have to plant it.
So we're really thrilled that Sizza was out there. Oh gosh! Hold on. There we go. I think I'm all set. All right. So hopefully you're all able to see the slideshow back again. But yes, so we're actually still actively hiring for the Tazo Tree Corps in our first 3 cities where we launched, in Minneapolis and Detroit and the Bay Area. And so, like I mentioned, the goal is to hire and train 25 Black and Indigenous people of color to become Tazo Tree Corps members, to support planting and caring for 1,000+ trees, and deliver that tool I mentioned earlier, the tree equity score tool, to US cities across the country. And so we have some more information here at the link here. But one of the things we're hoping to do, and one of the things that we thought about when we prioritize, okay, where do we need to do this work, are places with really stark inequities, tree canopy inequity right now. And so, you know, our goal is to not just hire on new folks with our employer partner, Davey Tree, to you know, bring them in, but to actually prepare them for careers in the field and have them set up to be launched upon their urban forestry career pathways as well. Excuse me. And so the model that we're working on is super unique, because most of the time when you have cores or you know, initiatives to like plant and care for trees, they're short term, and they are temporary for a year or maybe 6 months. But this is different. We're actually hiring permanent employees of our employer partner, Davey Tree. And so this model begins with the hiring phase, right? We've got grassroots-led partner-led recruitment. All of the entities I mentioned in the last, or that you saw on the last slide, who are our local partners, who are advancing this work day in, day out to plant and care for trees in their communities. They're the ones who are leading this work. We are basically a support for them. We have employer-led hiring, interviewing, and onboarding. So Davey has made commitments to create customized training for all of the folks who are joining in the Tazo Tree cohort of their hires. And the core members are going to be part of the BIPOC community, which is also really big for our mostly older white male field of arborists and urban foresters. And so the second part of the model is around training. So making sure that all the Tazo Tree Corps members can be onboarded and given the skill sets to thrive, right? Like we mentioned, if you just have a passion and desire for the environment and you don't mind getting a little bit dirty and working outside, these are really awesome careers to have. And so we get everybody skilled up on the latest tree care, safety, and kind of workplace readiness skill sets that they'll need to thrive on their crews and leading you know, tree care, modeling tree care in their communities. And then we're also training them in partnership with We Act for Environmental Justice, who will speak a little bit later here, on tree equity and climate justice, and where urban forests, the role urban forests play in helping us achieve resilient cities and resilient communities, specifically communities that have been left out of receiving, again, those critical tree benefits that we all deserve. And then finally, retention, right? Davey's actually committed to moving forward on they have their own suite of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility commitments organizationally. And so they're moving forward to commit to training their internal senior leadership, their trainers, and their hiring staff on bias and making inclusive practices so that folks who come in can be retained long-term. And so as part of that commitment, they have promoted an outstanding climber who has years of experience in the field of color to become a new employee engagement specialist and trainer to help also support retention, because we know that it's sometimes we can go into these established environmental organizations, whether they be private or nonprofit or in the academic space, the advocacy space, and it can be very isolating if you feel like you don't have anybody to talk to about your experience, or sometimes this is a safe space. Sometimes we just need to vent about white people, okay? And this is important, right? So that was a really important piece. I know that was necessary and important for Davey to commit to. And then finally, wraparound services. So this is the first step for some folks on their path to establishing a successful career for themselves, right? As environmental professionals, maybe they don't stay in tree care, maybe they want to move to water or wildlife or other forms of conservation, agriculture even. But what we want to make sure is that for the first 6 months on the job, that every person as part of the Tazo Tree Corps has the support that they need to be able to focus and be fully present and at work on the job. And that means providing subsidies that can cover childcare costs, can cover transit support, can cover housing costs. We're hiring in the Bay Area. The Bay Area is notorious for having very expensive housing. So making sure that folks are really supported all the way around, like there's nothing better than that, because we know that the investment that we make in the next generation of environmental stewards, as we all are on the line today, that's going to come back to us, a millionfold, right? In not just thriving communities, but also, or thriving resilient communities, but connected people to nature where they live. And that's so important and part of our ethos around making urban forestry more inclusive, making tree equity a priority, achieving tree equity. So at American Forest, this is one part of our career pathways work, this Tazo Tree Corps effort, and we're so thrilled again to be partnering with Tazo on this. But the work doesn't end just at making sure that BIPOC folks can get in the door and be supported. It also means that we as a sector have to reflect on our responsibility to standardize that kind of support, no matter what field we're in. So our sector is made up of, we have government partners, American Forest is a nonprofit, we have other nonprofit partners as well who work in urban forestry, state and local governments, of course, the private sector utilities, right? Utility line clearance specialists have often been, been moving in the direction of adopting more sustainable practices around their work as well, and our academic partners. So we convened all of our partners to actually create new national standards for inclusive workforce development, which includes creating a brand new pre-apprenticeship curriculum for the field. And so we hope to launch that in the summertime, so stay tuned for that. And then we're also making moves to partner with entities that provide those critical wraparound services I mentioned in the previous slide, right? So making sure folks have housing, right? Have groceries, have transit support, have childcare if they need it. That is the key to helping to hopefully undo or reverse, right, some of the systemic oppression that has happened in many urban neighborhoods that have been redlined. And it's kind of our way of making sure that everybody who can come into the field knows that they belong. And so it's going to take systems change to create true equity. American Forest is just one player on that, but this is our vision. Our vision is for folks to be able to be connected to the urban forest where they live, to be able to benefit from that with all of the benefits, including paychecks, and to be able to have resilient urban forests, resilient communities for the future. And so I thank you all for letting me share a little bit of our work with you today. I know that I'm going to be pinging it over to Taylor next to pick up. And I'm hoping that we can try to make sure that you have the slides, or I can run the slides here, or I can stop the share. But thank you so much, and welcome you to reach out to me directly via my email here if you have additional questions, or I'll be on the line too, so you can hit me up in the chat if you want to talk more around trees. Thanks.
Thanks so much. If you want to stop the share, I can go ahead and share my slides. It's so great to hear from the Tree Corps. My father is a wildlife biologist, and he went to school for forestry, so it's definitely familiar.
We love to see it. Yes.
Yes. For all of the Black forestry grads out there. So exciting. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Taylor Morton. I'm the Director of Environmental Health and Education at We Act for Environmental Justice. Forgive me if you hear a little, some car engines in the background. I am in New York City, and it truly never stops. So bear with me, please. But I'm so excited to be here and to talk a little bit about some of our environmental justice education work that we've been doing. And at the end, I'll talk a little bit about our partnership with Tazo and some of the work that we are going to be doing with our environmental health and justice leadership training. To get folks a little bit more familiar with what We Act for Environmental Justice is and who we are, we're a nonprofit that's located in Harlem and Northern Manhattan, and we'll talk in a moment why Northern Manhattan, why that place specifically, but we focus on environmental injustices and environmental racism issues at the local, state, and the federal level, especially when we're talking about the implementation of policies and practices and programs, and really trying to foster meaningful involvement for folks at all three levels, as well as the fair treatment and equity pieces. And when we're thinking about Northern Manhattan in general, Northern Manhattan is really shaped by the presence of a lot of environmental health hazards. The picture that you see here is the North River sewage treatment plant, where our executive director and co-founder, along with 6 or 7 of her colleagues, made a chain, and a human chain across the West Side Highway to bring attention to the sewage treatment plant as an issue, because it was causing a lot of respiratory issues for folks to live there. It was emitting a lot of harsh chemicals into the air that made it difficult for folks uptown to breathe and caused a lot of issues. And they were able to win a settlement to help mitigate the emissions from the sewage treatment plant, and that really gave a start to We Act for Environmental Justice and the work that we do. And we basically have continued to do this work since that happened about 30 or so years ago. To talk a little bit more about the work that we do at We Act, we really separate our work into a lot of different areas, a couple different areas. One of those is community organizing. We organize more than 800 We Act members. That's at the local, state, and the federal level. And we really started with a core group of folks at the local level, understanding that Northern Manhattan, as mentioned before, was an area that had so many environmental impacts. We live next to the sewage treatment plant. There's also a couple of gas plants that are nearby. There are a lot of highways. When we think about bus depots, so areas where the place where your bus goes at the end of the day to be worked on or to sit, and thinking about those as being really areas where buses are idling and spewing a lot of emissions into communities, and understanding that the majority of those, and 30 years ago, were in Manhattan, and the majority of those are still in Manhattan when we think about, are still in Northern Manhattan when we think about exposure. But we host monthly meetings and working groups around different topics, understanding that there are different topics that never seem to really fade away or go away. So we have a climate justice working group, we have a healthy homes working group that I've worked very closely with. We have a couple of other working groups that sort of come by, but offer folks, especially at the local level, an opportunity to really engage in the work. Understanding that, folks who really are impacted by these issues spending a lot of time at work. They spend a lot of time taking care of their families and doing whatever else they need to do. But there need to be designated spaces where folks can really engage in community issues and work on organizing and community science and all of these areas where we can actually make change in our community. And that's where the educational and training pieces come in. So we have an educational training that Tazo is so gracefully is going to help us digitize and help us host some cohorts for the spring and the summer, our EHJLT training. And the goal around that is to make sure that our community members are informed about the issues that they're leading on. It's hard to lead on an issue around toxic products when you don't know the foundation of how toxic products pose a harm to our bodies and harm to us as individuals. And that spans all of the topics around environmental health and environmental justice, as well as climate justice. We also have some worker training that we do for folks who are looking to get into green jobs. So we do a lot of solar training, specifically wanting to make sure as we go through a just transition that the folks who are working these jobs will have an opportunity to engage in that work. And we also work on several different types of curriculum on health. We work on a couple of cancer curriculums that really highlight risk and prevention, especially to Black and Brown communities, and understanding that as a key need to understanding how folks address cancer and other health issues. We also work with academic partners as well. We work especially closely with Columbia University on all different types of topics. We worked with them on air pollution. We worked with them on the cancer curriculums, and anything that sort of seems to come up, thinking about the disconnect between researchers and folks who are impacted by these issues, and that there is a dissemination need there. And we also engage in community-based participatory research. And advocacy is the last piece. So as mentioned before, we work on the local, state, and federal levels. We have an office in DC that handles our federal policy initiatives, and an EJ leadership forum, so a group of environmental justice groups that gather together to work constructively around some of the environmental justice issues at the national level. These are some of our focus areas. They're not all, an end all be all, and some of them have some sub areas. But I always like to say that when we're thinking about environmental justice, it's always really good to have a holistic view. Sometimes we say environmental justice and we mean that as a coverall for a lot of different things, right? But environmental justice can really lend itself to any issue that impacts our quality of life. So all of these issues, thinking about clean air, healthy homes, which can include lead, mold, and access to heat in the wintertime, and all those sort of things, our indoor environment, as well as land use and transportation. All of these things really are critical to our quality of life. And what we'll see in a lot of EJ communities is that it's not always just one issue. It's not just the mold in homes, right? It's mold, and you live next to a highway, and there's no access to clean air, clean water, healthy food, all of these pieces that really come together. And we try to work critically and strategically around all of these issues. And when we think about our educational programming, we definitely offer a pretty wide spectrum of educational workshops and trainings around these topics. And that, folks in certain communities may be facing one of these issues really harshly and may want specific understanding around this. I think we see this a lot in Northern Manhattan as well, that the issues sort of shift and change as we advance policy, as we experience new and different injustices. And that's a critical lens to sort of take to this work. What I'm going to be talking about today is some of the work that we do with youth and some of the work that we do with our educational partners. Last year, we had an opportunity to work with, for the first time, work with youth and really trying to get a better understanding on how youth perceive climate justice education. So really thinking about not just climate education and understanding climate change and its impacts, but having a critical lens around climate justice. How does it impact BIPOC communities and lower income communities? What solutions are out there that are not equitable to folks? And how do we make sure that our young folks know how to organize, right? And where are they receiving that information? Where are they learning about community organizing, if they're learning about it and on? What are the gaps? What are the things that we're missing? And all of these other sort of pieces. So I'm going to start out talking about the focus group report. And we did a focus group with about 15 to 20 kids across the state, just to get some first bits of insight into some principles that we were going to start to work on with educators, to get a clear understanding of what can we do as educators. And I mean that in the most broad sort of way, right? From researchers to teachers to folks like myself who work in informal education, to folks who work in different areas that aren't labeled environmental justice. What can we do to really support youth and educating them around these topics, or providing a platform for education for youth to educate each other? So I want to go through the focus group report and then talk about some of the principles that we came out with. The first one that we had here is that young folks who want to be involved with environmental and climate justice initiatives in their communities. That's really key when we think about the ways that we provide access for young folks into speaking up on their thoughts on different programs and initiatives, and not only speaking up, but taking ownership over programming and initiative especially at the local level, where you can have a more tangible impact. And understanding that it looks different for students depending on where they are. It was really interesting to do this focus group and sort of see the differences, especially between students in New York City and Rochester, right? That the ways that they engage civically were so different, and that really changed how they viewed environmental justice, that changed their experience of ways that they can get involved, and even hubs of other students who were available for them to engage with. And that sort of reaches out to the third takeaway, which is that the approaches when we think about climate education should be solutions oriented. I know I've always, even been in the trap where we're talking about climate education and someone's like, well, what can we do about it? And you're sort of like, well, what can you do about it aside from, recycling and all these other sort of pieces, right? But that we should be offering students ways to get involved civically, and really tying civic education to science, and really trying to mobilize at that intersection, and offer youth and young folks who want to be involved more solutions that are tangible and that are action focused. And I think it's also understanding that youth will also take it upon themselves to do that. And so sometimes it's not providing the solutions, but providing the support. Thinking about looking at more global perspectives in this work, when we're thinking about environmental and climate justice, this was really interesting as well. And working in different parts across the state, there were students who came from families who weren't from the United States, right? And that really shaped how they perceived environment, right? And what those issues were, especially students who spent a lot of time going back to those countries and coming back to the United States. Their perception on environmental justice and climate justice was really, really different, right? So providing that, providing those global perspectives is really key. And understanding that representation also plays a role, and not only about race and class, but also around age and ability. I think one of the most interesting things was to really hear students speak up about the climate strikes that had happened and how it impacted the way that they engage with climate and environment. And understanding that that's a really, really key piece that we don't talk about as often, especially as it relates to environmental justice and climate justice in BIPOC communities. And the last takeaway that we observed was students desired to have more conversations with adults in charge. It was really interesting to see and hear students talk about engaging with their local elected officials, and in some instances actually being brushed off by their local elected officials, that they weren't taken seriously because they were youth, right? So really empowering youth and being an advocate for youth engagement with adults or folks in power is really key in that. The feedback from the focus group report was that they aren't taken seriously in those spaces, and that makes it really hard to engage around those civic engagement pieces. So having all of that, having all of that been said, what we did was gather with a group of New York State educators who took the focus group report and from their own experiences, thought critically around what they could offer, right? What guidelines they could offer. And, in doing a lot of educational work, I think, from my perspective, it's really important to look at what materials are already there, right? We don't need to recreate the wheel and create something new when someone's already worked really hard to create something that might just need to be modified or specified. So what we did was take the New York City Department of Education's culturally responsive sustained education principles and modify them to be more specific to climate justice and environmental justice. In New York City, New York State, we're advocating really hard to make sure that climate change is something that is required for students to learn. They've already successfully done that in New Jersey, and we really want it to happen in New York State. Understanding that climate education that's specific and centered around justice is so key when we're thinking about the impacts of climate justice and environmental justice on the communities that we serve at WEACT. We have our EHJLT, our educational programming, right? But that isn't something that's offered at a wide spectrum. And there are a lot of other groups who have training that's similar to those opportunities, right? But getting students in tune to those opportunities has proven to be its own challenge, right? But a really good first step is providing principles for folks who are wanting to start doing this type of education. Maybe you've been doing climate education, but it's been missing those justice pieces. Maybe you haven't been doing climate education at all, and you want to find a way to really engage youth in the work. So what we've offered is a starting block for the work, some principles, some guidelines from these educators' experiences that are also derived from the focus group report for anyone who wants to teach about these topics. And I think it offers a really great start when we're thinking about legislation when we're thinking about potential legislation around climate education and climate justice education. So we'll go through a couple of these. One of the things that we put together, a key part of the culturally responsive sustained education principles, right, is to see the value and background and the views and needs of students to provide choices for how they engage. Choice is really important when we're thinking about environmental justice. Environmental justice is very much rooted in personal experience. It's rooted in community experience. And even though you may have a group of students learning in New York City, they may come from different parts of the city, and the ways that they engage with their environment can be really different. So providing folks an opportunity to pick and choose what they want to focus on, to pick and choose a focus on race or cultural language, or ability or anything, gender and sexuality can be really an eye-opening experience to students, especially as they connect their own experiences to the work, to their environment and environmental justice at large, and really being able to connect these experiences to the legacy of colonization and liberation in the context of climate justice is really important, right? And I think understanding that students will be in a really different space and place is also it's also key, and also um, a really big part of meeting students where they're at, and sort of allowing students to take their own journey through the work rather than hammering down certain pieces that need to be remembered or understood. Being aware of past and present forms of bias and oppression. So really understanding the practices and policies that are really key to environmental justice. Understanding what marginalized communities have gone through is really key, and really avoiding the problematic framing of topics. One conversation that I had with a teacher actually a couple of days ago, right? She was saying, you know, I really want to teach about lead and mold and pests, right? But my students really, some of them really feel really sensitive about those topics, right? So how do I start to have those conversations without these feelings of shame? And, you know, we sort of had a conversation that yeah, there's a lot of shame in having these conversations, but I think there's a framing that needs to be had around individual responsibility versus institutional responsibility, right? How we shape those conversations in education around accountability and who's accountable and who should have the shame can really shape how students engage with the topic. And you know, really wanting to make sure that students are taking advantage of these educational opportunities, even when they're dealing with some of these issues. But having an understanding, really trying to frame the work on the front end can be really key to making sure that students are engaged around this work and are receptive, and that we can all sort of work through a lot of these issues. Creating a emotional safe space for folks and fostering trust is really key, especially when we think about some of the sensitive conversation that could be happening, or even conflicts in conversation that could be happening with youth and students. Providing a space to value student experiences, to affirm student experiences, and really be an asset for learning and meeting students where they are. Once again, you never know someone's experience around these topics when they've been in the room, and it's really important to cultivate that safe space and to sort of take it bit by bit. And each classroom is really different. The issues that students face are really different, so that should be top of mind for educators as they go through this work. To validate students' experiences when we think about the narrative of storytelling, and really intersecting storytelling with data and current events, using a systems thinking approach. So this goes back to thinking about that larger systemic view on some of these issues, making sure that that's a really big highlight and a focus on the work. Understanding that issues that are personal can bring a lot of shame and a lot of different feelings that can sort of need to be worked through or might be a struggle. But understanding also that narrative storytelling can really offer ways for students to personally connect and have their own control over education, and also providing that data. So the evidence-based approach to thinking about climate and environment, and you know, really centering this around social, emotional, and mental wellness can be really key when we're thinking about ways to approach the intersection of storytelling, data, and current events when we think about this systemic approach to this work in education. And the last one that we'll go through is thinking about curriculum and learning and understanding that it should focus on wellness and restorative healing and restoration. There are a lot of really great trauma approaches that we can take in education to focus on wellness, to focus and make sure that we're having a lot of heavy conversations. How do we make sure that students are okay in the end? How do we foster and put their well-being at the front end of the work that we do, and understanding that it's intergenerational. We do the environmental health and justice leadership training with adults as well as youth. And that provides a really great intergenerational sort of setup for allowing folks of different ages, of different backgrounds to think critically around this work. But healing and restoration has to be at the front end. We never want folks to walk away feeling, upset or torn up or bothered by, these issues. But we really want to make sure that at the end of the day, the goal is not only to educate folks, but to foster that well-being that will really perpetuate us into further liberation and activism around these topics. Some things that I wanted to share before we go. As mentioned, again, we're so excited to digitize our EHJLT and host some cohorts in the spring and summer of this year. I'll definitely drop a link if anyone wants to engage with us. I'll also leave my email in the chat. Our youth program is not live yet, but our adult programs are live. If you're interested in the youth, engaging with youth, I can leave my email in the chat again. But if you are age 15 and up, I highly recommend you go on and take advantage of the cohorts that we have. There will be more to be added. And it's so exciting to have this work be cemented. There are a lot of educational pieces that get lost in translation, and this is a really wonderful opportunity to really cement that the work that we've been doing around education over the past 20 years and allow folks to engage with us. So we're so excited about that. If you want to know more about WeAct, I definitely recommend that you become a member, become a supporter. We do a lot on social media, and I know our handles will be distributed at the end, but that's a great way to keep up with the work that we're doing around our educational work, but also around a lot of our other initiatives that relate to climate justice and environmental justice and health. And I think that's all I have, and I'm going to go ahead and pass it off.
I guess that's us. Hi, thank you so much. I'm Sabs. I am a co-founder of Intersectional Environmentalist. I use she, her pronouns. I'm so excited to be here, and I have a background in the zero waste space. I worked for zero waste startups and ethical startups, and I have a platform, a blog called Sustainable Sabs as well, where I practice a low impact lifestyle and conscious consumption.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here today. The speaker prior, wow, I'm not sure how we're going to follow that up because that was a lot of really incredible information, but my name is Meetandra, she, her, and I'm a conscious curator, a community builder, and along with my lovely co-founder here, Sabs, also one of the founding members of Intersectional Environmentalist, along with Philip Aiken and Leah Thomas. And at IE, I spearhead business and resource development, and I have historically used my work to elevate intersectional sustainability through the lens of social impact and culture. And with my background in fashion and community building, I use my ongoing study, if you will. I like to think of our careers as an ongoing study to really unpack the importance of cultural storytelling in the environmental movement. And we're really excited to be here with all of you today. I'm going to pass it over to Sabs to give everyone just a quick behind the scenes on our founding story.
Yeah, so IE was founded a little bit less than a year ago, which is a little bit incredible to know because we recently hit 300,000 followers on Instagram. So shout out to our Instagram community. But the reason we were founded last year was following the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Our founder, Leah Thomas, was really calling on environmentalists. There was a huge just lack of solidarity, a lack of, talking about what was going on in the world within the environmental community online. And Leah, who had been practicing intersectional environmentalism for so long, really wanted to shift the narrative and have intersectional environmentalism be the only version of environmentalism, or the most prominent version of environmentalism, as it advocated truly for both people and the planet. And I'll just share our definition that Leah coined, which is intersectional environmentalism is an inclusive version of environmentalism that advocates for both people and the planet, identifying the ways in which injustices happening to marginalized communities and the earth are interconnected. And in this way, it really advocates for both the protection of people and the planet, not just one or the other. And when Leah created this post, she created this post on Instagram, and much to her surprise, it ended up going viral, the definition of intersectional environmentalism, as well as she had created an intersectional environmentalist pledge, which listed out a couple different ways that people could really continue to stand in solidarity, could use their voices, the ways allies could support really shifting this narrative and amplifying the voices of folks who have been talking about environmental injustice for so long. So with this virality, there was really this incredible opportunity. There were so many people who really wanted to learn, and there was so much momentum that the four IE founders, Leah, myself, Deandra, and Phil, we ended up just hopping on a call one day, and we tried to figure out a way to really take this momentum and turn it into a movement. And we wanted to play to our strengths. All of us have our own platforms, our own social media platforms. And as content creators, that's what we know how to do. We know how to create accessible and meaningful content. We know how to make something available to the public, not just using all this scientific jargon, because we really want everybody to be able to participate in this movement. We no longer want to advocate for the historic whitewash narrative of environmentalism. We would really want to bring a lot of the stories, a lot of BIPOC history that has been erased from the environmental narrative, and bring that to the forefront. And I will let Deandra speak a little bit more to the history of intersectionality.
Yes, thank you so much for that, Sabs, and to everyone that's in the chat that has heard of us and has been following us since the beginning. It's been, a really fast, what is it now, Sabs, 10, 11, almost 11 months now, which feels really wild. We're coming up on our year-long anniversary, but there is a beautiful history behind why we get to be here as the co-founders of Intersectional Environmentalists. So I just want to give some really important context that I think will really help root everyone in their environmentalist journey, which will now hopefully be intersectional. So where did intersectionality come from? Many of us here today might be, or hopefully are familiar with Kimberly Crenshaw, who is an incredible professor of law at Columbia University and the University of California, Los Angeles. And Professor Crenshaw has been studying civil rights and race and racial oppression for over 30 years now. And just like our work has been so inspired by Professor Crenshaw's work, she also had some inspiration of her own. So we want to amplify that history today. The term intersectionality was inspired by a group called the Combahee River Collective. And we'd love to hear in the chat if anyone has already heard of them, or if this is new to you, we'd love to, hear from you in the chat. And the Combahee River Collective is a Boston-based group of Black feminist lesbians who formed in the 70s to address how they were being left out of both feminist and civil rights movements. So in describing how they experience multiple overlapping types of oppression, they believed that, well, if Black women were free, then it would mean that everyone else would have to be free, since their freedom would combat discrimination based on race, class, gender, sexuality. So they were calling attention to the impacts of these overlapping forms of social disadvantage. So their work would later inspire Kimberly Crenshaw to coin the term intersectionality in 1989. And in the past decades, this theory has expanded to include the experiences of immigrants and folks with disabilities and those whose lives are impacted by multiple forms of discrimination. And we see that being a really prevalent study and theory to apply to the impacts on people within the scope of the climate crisis, which is why it's so important to environmentalism. So through an intersectional analysis, environmental justice activists and advocates are learning how to build a more inclusive movement and amplify the voices of those who have traditionally gone unheard, as like Sabs was describing, and like many of us are calling attention to now, so that we can start building more community-focused and informed solutions. So that's just a little bit of context that we hope everyone can embrace as they pursue their own journeys of intersectional environmentalism. And today we're going to be talking about what it means for us as a team, and kind of how we've harnessed the power of reimagining and using that history to reimagine what it means to be an environmentalist, and what it means for organizations to work together with grassroots movements and how to support them. So I'll pass it back over to Sabs.
I feel like one of the most common questions that we get is how to build a career in intersectional environmentalism. And because, we've only been around for less than a year, unfortunately, we can't give all of the folks who are super passionate about intersectional environmentalism a role. But there is this really unique opportunity we found that you don't have to just be an environmental science student to have a career or to really continue learning about intersectional environmentalism or apply that passion to your job. I have a background in advertising, and I've worked in marketing and with social media before, and we really want to emphasize that there is space for everybody within this movement. You don't just have to be, like I said, have that environmental science background, which if you do, that is still awesome, and we love you, and we, keep doing what you're doing. But as a media and resource hub, that's what we really know how to do. We know how to create media, and we know how to create and curate resources. So we play to our strengths. We, on social media, one thing that we really have started from the very beginning is just creating these really hyper shareable graphics. That's what we know how to do. And we almost have hacked the algorithm by creating these really beautiful graphics that have just good information there, a lot of really accessible education, to just share with people online, like a lot of these injustices that are happening that people might not be aware of. And we use, regular terminology, so it's not a ton of jargon. We really want everybody to be able to understand the extent of what's happening in this world and the voices of those who have been silenced historically. So there, like I said, we really want as many people as possible to participate in this movement. And through our platform, we've really harnessed the power of these creatives, whether that's copywriting or design or animation or video, to really help propel this movement forward.
Thanks for that, Sabs. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that one of the things we've learned in these past 10 to 12, 11 months is that being that our medium is predominantly via social, which Sabs just described as a wonderful platform to harness artivism, if you will, that along with that came an invitation for a lot of organizations and brands to work with us as a grassroots effort. that was seeking to shift the narrative of the environmental movement. So the way that brands, we learned very quickly, the way that brands work with grassroots efforts today is so important. And we'd like to highlight, one example that has been very near and dear to our hearts since our founding was working with Tazo as an example that truly empowered us to achieve our goals. Back in fall of 2020, Tazo reached out to support IE in what was very much so our infant stages of rethinking what it could mean to build our storytelling capacity and support our mission. So we've been working together to unpack what it means to be an accountable business behind the scenes with the team over at Tazo. And through that relationship, we were able to build an internship program that would support not only our growth, but our ability to spread, the messages that we're trying to spread and amplify the voices that we want to see amplified. So we were able to hire a diverse team of interns and work alongside these interns with all these incredible experiences to reimagine what it could mean to build intersectionality into pretty standard everyday roles. Sabs mentioned this. If you are in environmental studies, love it. If you're not in environmental studies, how can you work more closely with folks who are in environmental studies, right? And kind of build intention into each other's roles. And that was something we kind of just wanted to see, this beautiful meshing of intention so that everyone could have a spark of environmentalism in their role. So as an example, one of the interns that we hired was a merch intern. He headed up all of our merch partnerships and collaborations and things like that. And we wanted to really make sure that that was a community focused role. And so we had a really large audience that also wanted to support our growth and represent the movement and IE, which was just astounding to us. We're so grateful for that. And so this intern that we had on our team really focused on creating a sustainable merch drop through the lens of community empowerment. We partnered with small local vendors in the LA area and were able to share all the details of this merch drop on our site to educate our community around not only what a community empowerment project could look like, but to see how easy it is to do these projects when we are transparent and when we are able to amplify each other. So since then, I believe the folks that we were able to work with on that merch drop have gotten outreach from plenty of the folks in our community to kind of shift merchandise operations to one that reflected the merch drop that we did. So that's just one beautiful example of how our merchandise intern was able to kind of reimagine how to give that role an environmental focus. We also had an environmental justice research internship. And I know that we just said that it's important to reimagine kind of pretty standard everyday roles that aren't typically associated with environmentalism to have an environmental component. But I think on the flip side, if you are in environmental studies, or if you are looking to study that at some point, I also think it's an important time, and we learned through this internship program, it's an important time to reimagine what your degree is applicable to. So our environmental justice research intern fuels our social media page. And I'm not sure that that is typically a role that environmental justice students typically align their career paths with, but our intern in this spot, this actually ended up being our highest number of applicants was for the environmental justice research role. And everyone that filled out this application knew it would be to support our social media account and the growth of how we would spread our message. And we have so many important, sustainability accounts that myself and Sabs and everyone on the team has looked up to for so long. And we wanted to make sure that this intern was serving the very important purpose and helping guide us through what we wanted to do for the community alongside these sister accounts that were helping us unpack sustainability. And that was to make sure that we were constantly centering those most vulnerable to the issues that we were touching on and highlighting voices from conversations that often get erased, really making sure that we were adding to the dialogue in that way to kind of influence, which we're friends with most of the leaders of all of these large sustainable accounts. So it's been great to kind of see intersectional environmentalism across all of our accounts really start to infiltrate the conversation. But that was really the heart of this role, was to make sure that they were able to help us shift the narrative. And I hope that that kind of starts to expand where environmental studies and majors start to envision their purpose too. If you are really passionate about storytelling and narrative as an environmental justice researcher, you can totally have a huge, huge impact there. And we saw that through that internship program. And lastly, I will say that before I pass it back to Sabs, who worked with more of our creative interns, which is so fun and I was so jealous of, one of our interns that I was particularly passionate about, that I think it's an underrated role, is an operations and logistics intern. So for my business majors, anyone with business backgrounds, shout out to you. This is my love letter to your ability to support the movement. It's an underrated role in the scope of intersectional environmentalism. And we learned that being mindful of logistics protects team bandwidth, which protects our ability to do the work that we actually want to do. So this role helped us identify that grassroots efforts need to run efficiently and can get support from large organizations by way of things like simplifying legal processes or limiting email back and forth, and even offering mentorship with operational questions that grassroots efforts might have. So having somebody who has a keen eye on how to protect bandwidth and strategically work with organizations to make sure that they are empowering us to protect our bandwidth too, and not, burdening us with too many processes, was so important to us being able to talk about the things that we truly needed to focus on and talk about. So, that was something that was really important to me because I head up business operations, and it's difficult when you get bogged down with things that don't feel like they matter, but they matter. That was my spiel on that. Sabs, I'll let you take it away from there.
So Dee Dee has outlined some of the incredible interns that we have that she works most directly with. Some of the folks I work very directly with, also from that internship program, are we brought on an eco-communications intern to really take our voice to the next level and really just, we use social media because that is the tool that we know how to use. That's what we know how to reach as large of an audience as possible with. So our copy intern has had background working at as an editor for magazines before, and copywriting and all of that stuff, and has been able to really harness our voice and use that in social media, but also use that across our website, which is a little bit more buttoned up, and to really help us define a lot of this terminology and just make environmental education accessible. A lot of environmental studies and a lot of education or news articles out there are really, whether they're, difficult to understand because they use a lot of jargon, or because they're really difficult to read because of how heavy the news is, it becomes inaccessible in many ways. So we're trying to really break down those barriers and really focus on solutions. A lot of our content, we try not to focus too much on the doom and gloom, and we focus very heavily on what are some action items we can take? How can we take this frustration that we have with the movement or with the world and turn that into something positive? So that's where our eco communications intern came in. We also had a couple different design and graphics interns. So we had a web design intern who also does a lot of graphics for us, a video intern, and an animation intern who also created some graphics as well. But we are fleshing out our YouTube channel. We're continuing to create video content because we want to make sure that we are creating different versions of content, not just photos, not just carousel graphics, so that we can reach different people in different ways. And the culmination of this internship program, which we are really excited about, was a video called The Intersectional History of Environmentalism, and really took all of the folks from this internship program and was this beautiful collaboration process as it used we needed a script for the video, which is where our copy intern came in. We needed research to support, all of these findings about an intersectional history of environmentalism. We needed animation and graphics help. So it really was a team effort to develop that. And one of the reasons I love that project, I love it for many reasons, because it's so informative and educational and beautiful, but also because it really showed that we do need as many people as possible from different backgrounds and different skill sets to really make this movement possible. So those were our interns. Didi, I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, no, I've loved, as somebody with a business and operational background who, usually focuses on logistics, seeing those projects come to fruition is just really incredible. And I think that, kind of a little love note to all the creatives on our team, something that we talk about a lot is a result of under-amplified voices is that the history, and we learned this through the research process, the history itself is not well preserved. So recently on our podcast called Dismantled, we released an episode where some of the folks from our research and creative team talked about the process of that video. And our animator on our team talked about how she was able to bring some of these older photographs and images to life using animation and photography and Photoshop, like her skill set, making sure that we are able to preserve that history just as well, if not, in our own BIPOC flair or community flair, intersectional flair, preserving that history so that we can continue to tell these stories in a compelling and engaging way. So being able to listen to their thought process behind what it meant to be a creative that was applying to the preservation of this culture and this history was so incredible. So just to reiterate, the hype that Sabs was giving to those team members, just wanted to add to the hype. And yeah, before those are just a few of the internship roles and kind of just roles in general that we've been building and trying to reimagine and rethink. And we truly believe that the interns that we've had, when they leave IE, even though we wish we could keep them all, when they leave IE and go out into the workforce, the things that they learned at IE are very applicable to, similar roles that they'll have in organizations. People just need to be empowered to approach their roles from an intersectional lens, which is what we used this Tazo internship program to really do, was to give young people in our community the space to do that. And it turned out really beautifully. And just as an additional final anecdote, I will add that, most of us on the team were furloughed, jobless before we started IE, and many of us were assistants before we started IE. I myself was an assistant buyer, and as an assistant, you don't get as much hype as you deserve, but when you are in those entry-level positions, sometimes your job is to keep, your bosses or your mentors' things in order, help them keep their head up screwed on straight and all of those things. And it gives you a tremendous amount of exposure. And in my old role, I was able to be exposed to a lot of those organizational things in a business capacity. And I built really incredible Excel skills that I would have never thought would lead me to being an effective co-founder of Intersectional Environmentalism, just like having business Excel skills. So please don't discount, whatever background that you have or whatever you're pursuing. Please don't discount, your ability to contribute to the movement. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to plop them in the chat. We'd love to end on, I think we might have someone's phone. If we want to maybe mute that, I think it looks like it might be Maxine's iPhone. Sorry to call you out, Maxine. But let's see here. I think that while anyone's thinking of some final questions that they might have for us, would love to just highlight some examples of things that we're seeing a lot of students doing that is just honestly blowing our minds. We are so rocked by the idea of how many students are changing the university game right now. And we think it's so important. There are students right now that are emailing us and telling us that they've talked to their professors about updating curriculums to have stronger environmental justice messaging and provide a more holistic view on the histories and solutions that you and all of your fellow students are studying, which is incredible to us. And you have that power. Everyone has that power. And I would say one of the ways that I've seen that approached was a student created a really beautiful email template, and a ton of students emailed it in and got that environmental justice class created or that curriculum updated. So that has been such a beautiful way that we've seen youth mobilize in the education system. We've also gotten a lot of really beautiful emails and updates from people who have started their own clubs solely so that an environmental club could have, you know, at its core, at its heart, be an intersectional environmentalist club, as opposed to making it an afterthought, because it's not an add-on. It is the heart and soul of how we should be approaching environmentalism. And then lastly, I would say, as we live in a time of social media, that it's so important that we learn. Of course, we use it as a really beautiful vehicle for learning, but that it empowers us to then get off of our phones and go act locally. We've had so many emails and updates from, you know, youth organizers and people talking about, young people telling us that, you know, being local is their superpower, really educating fellow students and getting them involved in local politics and issues. And finding ways to amplify those that need to be heard in your area specifically is a beautiful way to translate what you're learning online at a national or global level to how you can have impact in your own area. This is something that, as a huge platform, you know, whether you follow IE or other large sustainability platforms, we're there for that specific, you know, overarching level of education. And of course, we get as nuanced as we can, but that's acting locally being your superpower is something that these large platforms, we can't do. We can't do that with our large platforms. So what we're hoping is that we can empower and equip you to go and act locally. And that's something that we've been getting a lot of feedback from our community, and it's been beautiful to see. So if any of those things I just mentioned, starting clubs, getting curriculums changed, acting locally, and mobilizing the people around you to do that, if you've been doing that, thank you so much. And if you have ideas on how we can better empower people to do that, we are an email away. Thank you all so much for supporting us and checking out our work along the way. And I think that's all we have. I think we will wait for a minute or so for the next speaker to pop up. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to plop them in the chat. And Sabs and I will hang out here for just a minute in case anyone has any final cues.
All right, so I think that's all we have today. For folks that were not here at the beginning, I'm your Zoom host, I'm Analia. I'm just gonna share my screen really quick and try and find the slide deck so I can put up some info for everyone to plug into. Just give me 1 second. All right. Okay. So we've got here is some contacts. So we are at the end of our hour here, and if you'd like to get in contact with anyone from American Forests, from We Act, Intersectional Environmentalist, or Tazo, there's info up here. And I believe some folks have dropped their info in the chat as well. But feel free to get into any of this and ask some questions.
And if I may say, on behalf of the Tazo team, just thank you all so much to all of our presenters today for all of the amazing content that was shared. I can't wait to go back over the video recording and the slides themselves, and just, hugely appreciative of the work each and every one of you are doing.